Welcome back to Jacques in the Garden for a very special episode, because in this one, I am going to be rating and breaking down the reasons for why I would choose one tomato over another, and we've got 25 different ones to talk about. Now, I actually even made a table that I'm going to be filling out that covers things like taste, texture, yield, and bonus information that might be handy for you at home, and also things that I actually do consider as important for reasons to keep a tomato or maybe get rid of one. Now, in terms of taste, I'm going to be breaking it down as best I can that could be helpful for you guys at home, because obviously taste is a subjective factor, but I'm going to be talking about the sweetness, the acidity, the savoriness, and the aroma, because of course, no taste is complete without the smell. Now, beyond that, we will also be covering texture, and this is a big one because for me, texture is incredibly important in determining what I really want to eat, especially as a fresh raw tomato. I don't want a juicy, watery mess. I want a nice, rich, creamy tomato. Now, in a recent video, I used the word unctuous to describe a tomato, and a lot of people got triggered because the technical dictionary definition is an oily, greasy feel. But if you're like me, you might have grown up watching Food Network as a kid, and unctuous was used to describe something that was rich and creamy and kind of filled your mouth in that sort of coating way that maybe might be kind of described as greasy, but don't worry, I won't be using it today. Instead, we'll talk about how firm it is, how meaty and fleshy it is, how creamy it is, and its juiciness. Essentially for me, when it comes to eating a raw tomato, the texture is really important, but when it comes to cooking, it's not so much of a big deal because you're going to be breaking it down all entirely anyway. So we are going to be classifying these tomatoes in different ways. I've got some sauce tomatoes, some cherry tomatoes, and everything in between. So let's kick this off. We're gonna start it off with one of my classically favorite tomatoes out there, and that is, of course, the Cherokee Purple. Now, I will be tasting all these tomatoes, and I will not get sick of eating these tomatoes. And in fact, I even got myself a bowl down here. I've already placed it in the freezer to pre-chill it, and any of the leftover tomatoes going into that, and it's gonna go into the salad that we eat for dinner tonight. So let's kick it off with the first one, Cherokee Purple. One thing I'll say about Cherokee Purple is that it's very variable. It could be hit or miss. On some years it does incredibly well, others not so much. But one of the things that is kind of annoying for a lot of people is that Cherokee Purple tends to crack very often. Now, these cracks in general are just cosmetic, but sometimes they can get some fungal stuff in there and get a little bit gross if you live in a humid climate, which is why I also grow Cherokee Carbon, which does occasionally crack, but it is much more resistant to cracking. So we'll get onto the taste in a moment here. I figured we should do those back to back because they are pretty similar. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut this tomato, get a nice little knob off of it. I'm gonna cut it into two pieces after that. I'm gonna try one fresh, and then I'm gonna try one with salt. So first, let's give it a sniff. It just smells so good. It has that classic sort of savory, tart smell to it. I don't know how else to describe it. It smells like a rich, classic tomato smell that you might be familiar with anytime you cut into a tomato that makes your mouth water. So let's give it a taste straight up. One of the things about dark tomatoes is that they're often described as being savory or having elements of umami. And I definitely get that. There's almost like a back smokiness to it. It's not like a smoky flavor, but it's similar to what you would experience when you're eating a smoky meal. Now, when you try it with salt, one of the things that changes is that things like sugars can actually be sort of toned down. You could kind of balance out the flavor of some tomatoes. Now, in general, I would consider Cherokee Purple to be a very balanced tomato. It has sweetness, but it definitely has a little bit of tartness to kind of balance that out. But really the savoriness is what saves you from not just having a entirely sweet tomato. It's something complex and rich in flavor. So with a little bit of salt, I feel like the sweetness actually popped on me, and in a very delicious way. It really helped me taste that savoriness a little bit more. In terms of the texture itself, I would describe that as somewhere between juicy and creamy. It's not really like a watery tomato. It's not really like a full creamy tomato, but it has elements of both. It has plenty of juice, but overall it is a sort of creamy mouthfeel. So in terms of taste, I'm gonna go on a scale of 1 to 5, and I'm gonna be careful with my 5s. I'm willing to be blown away by one of these today. So for now, I'm gonna set it at a 4, and a 4 is something that I would grow every single year no matter what. And a 5 is guaranteed to grow no matter what. So let's give that a 4. In texture, I'm gonna again say it's juicy to creamy. And in terms of yield, that's where it can be a little bit hit or miss. Cherokee Purple is not the biggest yielder out there. And some years, like I said, it does great. Other years, you might only get a handful of tomatoes from it. So I'm gonna call it low to mid. Now, as a bonus factor here, This is one of the classic heirlooms, one of the tomatoes that really kicked off and started the heirloom tomato craze, which probably led to the breeding and creation of many tomatoes that we love to eat today. So I've got to give props to Cherokee Purple for that. But now let's try its modern cousin, the Cherokee Carbon. So right there you could see there's definitely some juiciness coming out of that tomato. The cool thing about Cherokee Carbon is that it is a hybrid. Now I believe it's a hybrid between Carbon and Cherokee Purple. And the thing that happens with hybrids is, don't worry, they're not GMOs. There's only one GMO tomato out there, and I don't even know if it's technically really a GMO, but it's the one that's purple or blue, whatever it is. I haven't bothered to grow it. What is great about a hybrid is you just take two heirlooms, you cross them, you get a plant. That plant can be delicious, could be useless. In this case, it is delicious, and we have the Cherokee Carbon. Now, with hybrids, you tend to get more disease resistance, you tend to get better yields, and that has always been the case for me when it comes to Cherokee Carbon. It always outperforms Cherokee Purple. The flavor is very, very similar to the point where I think most people wouldn't really tell the difference. In fact, right now, I'm gonna give it a taste and I'll see if I could tell any difference. Same exact smell as the Cherokee Purple, just like a classic tomato smell. Now in this case, I'd say that this might have been picked a little bit early, which is user error on my part. If you look at the tomato here, see how it has more of this yellowish sort of green here compared to that Cherokee Purple I showed you guys earlier. It's a much darker green on top. And that is going to signify that it is a bit riper. It's also a little bit darker in the purple tones. So in my opinion, this one came out a little bit early. It's still good. I would say that the texture of this is more watery than the actual Cherokee Purple, which to me is a downside and a reason for me to prefer the Cherokee Purple. It has less sweetness in this case. Let's try it with salt though. So honestly, the salt did make that sweetness pop a little bit more, but like I said, it is a bit early. If I have to rate it in comparison to Cherokee Purple, it's going to be a 3.5. I'm gonna say it's juicy plus, over creamy, and the yields are gonna be mid to high, or let's just call it mid, because there's plenty of other tomatoes that perform way more in terms of yield than the Cherokee Carbon. Now as a bonus, it is a hybrid, it has more disease resistance, it gives you that classic savoriness that you might expect from the Cherokee Purple. This definitely still has that umami note to it, and that is of course going to be a bonus because some people just cannot get the Cherokee Purple to produce well enough for them to justify giving up the space in their garden. Check out the Cherokee Carbon. It might be the perfect fit for you. And now we're going to continue into some more hybrid tomatoes, and this is actually easily been one of my favorites. This is one that I grew for the first time last year. It's called Lemon Boy Plus. Now this is plus because it has extra disease resistant spread into it. I think there is a standard Lemon Boy. I don't know if it's hybrid or not, but I've only grown the plus variety. And plus signifies that it's also resistant to like root knot nematode, blights. I'm not entirely sure if that's true in this case, but I believe it is nematode resistant. The cool thing about this tomato is that if you harvest it a little bit early, I actually have a plant right here next to me. If you harvest it while it's still more yellow rather than orangey, this one's way too early, it will have more of a lemony flavor to it. If you wait for it to turn a little bit more orange, it will develop more sweetness. So if you're somebody who prefers to kind of dance on the edge of sweet to tart, this one can kind of satisfy both parties. You let it go full ripe, it'll be sweet, pick it a little bit early, it'll still have a delicious flavor while being sweet at the same time. So let's go ahead, split that. Beautiful color here. It has a very nice kind of pale yellow on the inside. And this is a tomato that I will be growing every single year for sure. Let's give it a taste and see what I can describe it at. I would describe this as being juicy and firm. This is a great tomato that you could slice onto a sandwich. It'll hold its shape well. It has some crispness to it. In terms of flavor, it is going to be mostly on the sweet side because I did let it go full ripe. But like I said, if you prefer it to be a little bit more tart, just pick it a little bit early and you will get more of those tart acid notes. So if I were to break down this tomato into either being a sweet, tangy, balanced, or bland, it's definitely not bland. It's probably closest to balanced, but again, if you pick it early, you can get into that tangy area. So let's see what it's like with some salt. It does actually have some creaminess to it. The salt, again, does make that sugar pop to me, and it's just such a rich, refreshing tomato. The tang is there no matter what, but I wouldn't call it tart or acidic. I would just call it tangy. It's very interesting. And again, it's one of these tomatoes that I will for sure be growing every year. It yields well, it performs well, it can resist the nematodes, and it's beautiful. So what more is there to say about it? Put that up there with Cherokee Purple in taste, give it a 4. And the texture, I'm gonna say it is firm to juicy, and yields are going to be mid. As a bonus point, it has plenty of disease resistance. The next tomato is super, super classic. This is Big Beef Plus. Now I added all these hybrid tomatoes last year to solve my root knot nematode problem, or at least help it. And as you can see, This is a beautiful red tomato here. Very classic looking, nothing special going on. Just looks like a tomato you would see from a cartoon or what you would exactly picture in your head when you thought tomato. Now this one is really cool because it could get quite large, as the name implies. I actually picked one of the smaller ones, but they're very variable in size. Some of them could be quite massive. This is going to be a tomato that's going to be perfect on a sandwich, perfect on a burger. It has classic tomato flavor, but let's see how it holds up. On the cross section, you'll see that it has, oh man, it's juicing out right now, but it's very firm feeling. It has a nice jelly seed cavity, but for example, if I were to slice it, I know this is not the way people normally slice tomatoes. Usually you would go this way, but it holds together very well. It's not going to be dripping out and falling apart on you, which is exactly what you want on a sandwich or a burger. So let's go ahead and give that a taste. All right, let's rate this. It's gonna fall into the balanced category because it has sweetness, but even at this full ripe stage, it definitely has a little bit of acid and tartness to it, which is exactly what I'm looking for in a tomato. So we're gonna give that, it's a solid 4. I mean, a lot of these tomatoes, they're not new to me, so there's a reason I'm growing them. I already love them, so they're going to have great flavor, at least so far. We're gonna get into some new ones for sure, but this is definitely going to be a firm tomato, and depending on how you grow it, it can be juicy, not a bad thing, but as you can see, it definitely has the juice in there. Now yields on this are really high. I'm gonna say mid to high. This is a tomato that for me performs not just in terms of yield, but also in the weight of the tomato itself, you get a lot. And it also has produced for me all the way up until December when everything else was getting covered in disease. This guy was still trucking and cranking out delicious tomatoes. So this is one that, again, it's going to be a forever tomato for me in my garden. I'm gonna grow it every year no matter what. Extreme disease resistance, extremely good yields, and it's delicious. And honestly, pretty good, perfect size for slicing and throwing on a burger. So now we're out of familiar territory and we're into the first new tomato. Now I am going to actually lump together a different one here with it. This is the Talvez tomato. Both this and Benevento are from Bene seeds. So before we rate Talvez, there's also another tomato called Benevento, which I added this year. Both Talvez and Benevento were expensive seed, and they're both hybrids from Bene seed. And the thing that's true about both these tomatoes that is a bonus point across the board is that they hold for a very, very, very long time. When I say they hold for a very long time, that means you could leave it on the plant fully ripe. It won't rot or turn super squishy and wet. It'll hold just fine for weeks on end. If you bring it in on your counter, it's probably going to last longer than any other tomato that you would harvest. It's still gonna be delicious. It's not gonna get all fermenty and weird. And the texture on them is always very firm, very sort of meaty, and that's something that I always appreciate. Now, when it comes to the Benevento, which I don't have one right now to taste, and we'll get into that right now, the taste of it was good. I'd say it's a 4, a really good classic tomato that I would always like to eat. The texture was firm and creamy, but the yields were incredibly low. Very hit or miss tomato in terms of yield. Some people warned me about that, and that's been entirely true. I harvested 3, and ever since then, the plant still doesn't have any more coming, and it hasn't been too hot. There's no reason it shouldn't produce. It's just a finicky tomato. So it does get bonus points for being a long-standing, long-holding, giant fruit. It's actually oftentimes twice as big as this one, or maybe 50% bigger than this one. But it was delicious. It just didn't yield well enough for me. Now let's get into the Talvez, which I do have to taste here. This one's been cranking out tomatoes pretty regularly, and they've been actually doing quite well. Now, this is one that I would keep. I could already tell you that. If you look inside, it has a very classic, pretty big pulp cavity in there with some decent seeds. So if I cut it into quarters again, you could take a look at it. It is a little bit juicy, but it is mostly firm. This is a tomato that you see when I squish it, when it kind of pops here, it doesn't just juice out. It's more of like a creamy texture that's kind of spilling out. So I'm gonna give this a taste. Not that exciting so far because all these tomatoes are great. I'm gonna put this one into a 4 again. Now, one of the things that you might not like about this tomato is it has a thick skin. A lot of people don't want the thick skin in their mouth. It gets stuck in their teeth. I get that, but it is one of the trade-offs that you get for having a tomato that holds for a very long time and can last for a very long time on your kitchen counter or in the garden. The texture here, I'd say, is juicy to creamy. It is firm because it could hold very well, but when you eat it on its own, you get more of that juiciness and more of that creaminess rather than like a firm kind of bite through texture. And the yields are actually quite decent. Now that it's a smaller tomato, I'd say it's on the mid to high range, which is actually quite good. And I actually really appreciate this size because it's great for throwing on a bagel or a little sandwich. You could throw it into salads just fine. And the bonus, of course, is the fact that they hold for such a long time, which is an amazing feature to have in any tomato that you grow at home. Next, we have Harvest Moon, which is a tomato I added alongside with the Lemon Boy Plus and the Big Beef Plus. This is one that was described as being resistant to nematodes, compact habit, great for Florida weave. And I actually haven't grown that many bicolor orange red tomatoes, so I wanted to give one a go. Now, you might have already guessed since I grew this already last year that I did like this tomato, and indeed that's true. Right off the bat, you could see there's not very much seed cavity in here. It is mostly fleshy and meaty, delicious tomato. So if I keep cutting, really not a lot of seed, which is really wonderful for me. I really like that in a sandwich because it's not going to be as wet, but it's going to have all that flavor. So this is the first tomato from the ones that we've tasted so far that I would say leans more towards sweetness rather than acid. So what I would describe this as is having a citrusy sweetness to it. Now, again, absolutely wonderful, delicious tomato. It's hard for me to not say it's a 4. So how would I rate this tomato? I would call it firm and creamy. That's because it doesn't have that much of a seed cavity, which makes it a little bit less juicy, but it does have that wonderful creaminess that gets into your mouth when you chew it. It breaks down really richly and nicely. The yield on this is actually quite good. I would say it's a mid yield. The disease resistance does allow it to produce longer into the season, which I appreciate. And they often do have really good sizes. Now, a lot of them are around this size, but I've had some about 50% bigger, which I do appreciate as well, just because they look cool. It's a beautiful tomato. It does well in a Florida weave. It's another one of those that I'm going to try to grow every year because it does do well for such a long period of time over the season. Now, there's 2 more I want to cover that I don't have on the table right now, but I have to mention, and that is Italian Heirloom. Fantastic tomato. Very large size. I've already harvested them all. I made some sauce the other day. It's one of these tomatoes that is great for sauce. It's great for fresh eating. It's good on a sandwich. I would describe it as being more creamy forward and juicy rather than firm. It has a very kind of soft, delicate texture. And the yields are actually quite good. I just don't have a ripe one right now. As a bonus point, it's an heirloom that performs well. It's multi-purpose, both in sauces, fresh eating, and salads. And it's one that I would just recommend no matter what. Now we get into Beefy Purple. This is one that I planted in my greenhouse back in November and harvested all the way through spring up until this point, where it's now kind of hit the top of my greenhouse. And I think it's just way too hot in there for it to thrive anymore. Very beautiful, streaky tomato, really rich creaminess, great flavor. I'd say it's more of a balanced. I would say that it's probably gonna, again, fall into that 4 range. And it's one that I would keep again. It's starting to get a little bit hard to eliminate. So at the end, we're probably gonna have to cross off some of these 4 tomatoes and just make a choice. But now let's get back to one that we do have to taste, and that is the Moneymaker. So the story on why this tomato is called Moneymaker is that it's apparently so prolific that it was guaranteed to make you money. And take a look, it is actually quite prolific. It sets wonderful amounts of tomatoes on their trusses all the way up consistently without missing a beat. But does it actually taste good? I actually don't really know if I've tried this. I tried an early one, so I don't know if that's really a fair representation. Right here, you see some of this weird ripening occurring on the top of the tomato. I don't know why that's happening here, because it's definitely ripe enough. So let me take a cross section from the bottom here. Decent amount of jelly seed cavity in there, which can be a bad thing if you don't want it to leak all over you. And it does seem like it is juicy, a little bit wet. Let's give it a taste fresh first. Okay, that's interesting. Because so far, out of all the tomatoes we tasted so far, this is the creamiest. Almost felt like the texture of like ice cream in my mouth, where it kind of melted and broke down instead of just kind of like being all juicy. I would say that the flavor though, it is a classic sort of balanced flavor, but I wouldn't rate it higher than a 4. I'd say it's probably closer to a 3. I'm just gonna call it creamy because that's the only thing I could really tell. The yield is high. I don't want to say it's bland. It has that kind of classic taste to it, but it doesn't have enough acid for me to really enjoy as a daily eater. It's more on the sweet side and it's low acid, which for some people, fantastic. This is one I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this is going to be a guaranteed keeper or not. The texture I did really enjoy, but I need a little bit more acid. So this is one that's going to be a maybe keeper. I'm not quite sold on it yet. We'll see how it develops through the season. But actually, very interesting, not bad. Gotta say, pretty impressive for the amount of tomatoes you actually get. The yield is incredible. And now we have Strawberry Fields. This is a new one that I got this year from Johnny's. It's a very classically pink tomato. You could really tell the difference when it's next to a red tomato, just how pink it is. And pink tomatoes, to me, historically, I've always liked. There's a lot of classic Bulgarian tomatoes that I've always enjoyed that were pink tomatoes. And this is one that was described as being very compact, good for growing in a Florida weave, which, as you could tell, I like. But the problem was that it was too compact compared to the other plants. So it actually ended up being a lot shorter than some of the other neighbors. But that's just a problem on my end. It's not the tomato's fault. So let's see what it tastes like though. It just doesn't have enough of anything going on that's compelling. The texture is okay. I'd say it's probably juicy to creamy, not interesting enough to be worth it, kind of forgettable. The flavor is just not good enough for me. This is probably one that I will not be growing again because I was just so underwhelmed by that bite. Now let's try it with some salt. It's not necessarily that it's bad, it's just not interesting enough. And if it's not interesting enough, it's got to either yield like crazy, be bulletproof to disease, or some other feature like that. It's a little bit better with the salt, but overall, too sweet forward for me. Not enough complexity, no savoriness, no acid. So, meh. Just to be fair, because we've given so many 4s, I'm gonna have to put that into a 2, maybe a 2.5. The texture is kind of juicy, just call it juicy. It's mostly juicy. The yield, honestly, has been okay. I'd call it a mid yield. I guess the benefit is that it might have some disease resistance because it is a hybrid. It could be good for Florida weave if you were growing a whole row of them. And it's a pink tomato. But beyond that, I don't think I'll be growing that one again. And now for another tomato that's new to me. This one is called Woodstock, and it's from Johnny's again. And it's a green tomato. It's described as being ripe when you start to see a red pinkish blush at the blossom end, which is exactly what I see here. But you could see it still has green shoulders up top. So it could be kind of tricky to figure out when to harvest these. So I really appreciate that it has that coloration at the bottom here. Now this one, I've never tried. I've never cut into it. So I want to cut, let's go ahead and do a traditional slice on this one so we could see if there's any interesting colors. Oh, okay. Very interesting colors. That is definitely a funky tomato. Wow. The seed gel is entirely green. I was not expecting this at all. That's actually really cool. Let's cut another slice. Dang. All right. So in terms of looks, this one is the most impressive to me. If I were to serve this up to people, I think they would have a very fun time looking at this tomato and trying to figure out what was going on. I'm very curious to try this one because again, I have not tried it. I have no idea. I've never really grown a green tomato like this. So let's see. That's not bad. That's actually quite good. So that's Woodstock. I'm gonna put it up there in the 4 taste range. Nothing like incredibly mind-blowing, but very, very solid and delicious like the others. The taste itself, it's sweet, but it definitely has a little bit of acid kick, just enough so that you're not only tasting sugar, which is just fine by me. The texture, I would describe as being sort of firm to creamy, like a more meaty kind of texture. The yield, so far, I think has been pretty low. Not the biggest yielder so far. Now, the only caveat here across everything when it comes to yield and things like that is that I have discovered root knot nematode once again in my garden, which can definitely affect the yield. So I'm not going to say that it has that issue or doesn't, but I will have to say that right now, I would consider it to be a low yield. The bonus here is that it's a very psychedelic, very interesting, striking color on the inside especially. And honestly, I think there's enough reason for me to want to try to grow this again because the taste was good and also because of just how cool this looks. I would love to make a salad of this sliced up with a little bit of mozzarella and basil. That would be a very fun looking salad. So one of the new varieties to me that I already ate, which is a Bulgarian variety I found online, it's called Mikka, M-I-K-K-A. That one we do like. I did a taste test across the household. We all agreed that it was up there with the others. I'm giving it a 4. It had a very creamy mouthfeel to it. The yield, so far, it's only just begun growing. It's a very early, younger plant over there in my garden, but it does look like it's doing quite well so far. I'd say it's probably in the low to mids at least, but a little bit early to tell. The bonus point is that it is a Bulgarian. Now, the next couple I want to cover, actually, before I do that, let's go ahead and there's 2 more bonus tomatoes here. This one is Nepal. Nepal is a tomato I've heard about for a long time, but I had never grown before. I believe it's one of the classic heirlooms that's been around for a very long time. and I wanted to give it a try. Right off the bat, I'll tell you the yield is very low. It's probably the lowest in that row of tomatoes out there. So let's see what it tastes like. Classic tomato taste. I'd say it's like purely balanced. Sweetness or tartness doesn't take over. It just tastes like what I think about with a tomato. The skin's a little bit rough, like it's a little bit tough on the outside. Juicy to creamy vibe. It's okay, it's not bad. If you're looking for like a very classic tomatoey flavor, this one has it. I don't know why it didn't yield so well in my garden this year. This is the only year I've grown it, so I only have one reference point. But it's definitely not a bad tomato. I'd say that it's probably gonna be like a 3.5 in terms of taste for me. And the texture, it's kind of like all of the textures across the board. It's just like very tomato. It's just a tomato across the board. I don't know what else to call it besides that. Now, we're gonna get into some of these early tomatoes next. I have 3 of them here. I have the early girl, the new girl, and then I have Moskovich. Now, there's also a 4th one I grew this year, which was called Glacier, and I've already eliminated that from contention. It's too watery, doesn't have enough taste. If I had to rate it compared to all these, I'd probably call it a 1 because the Strawberry Fields was a 2. It has to be lower than that. So if you need a lot of tomatoes and you need them early, might be a good option for you, but they're not gonna taste like much. It did cook down into an okay sauce in the end, but that's not the purpose of that tomato. So I can't say that that's any bonus point. So now let's get into these other earlies because these are more classic tomato size. The Glacier is closer to something like this, maybe in between that one and one of these guys. And so let's cut these all in half and compare the inside first. So that's the early girl, this is the new girl, and this is Moskovich. So right off the bat, I could already see that the Moskovich has a creamier look to it. The flesh itself has a creamy appearance. It also seems to have, they all have a pretty good amount of seed cavity in here, which makes it a little bit watery. You could even see some of the seeds are leaking out of this. But really, when it comes to an early tomato, it's all about the taste. Is it worth getting that tomato a few weeks earlier than everyone else just to get something that doesn't taste like anything? Well, let's find out. Typical tomato, it's one that can be dry farmed and it does concentrate the flavors. As it stands right now, I'd say for an early tomato, it's not bad. It has not that much sweetness to it. It has more acid present. So it makes it a little bit more leaning towards bland. If I had to rate, I'd say maybe a 2.5. Now let's try the new girl. Now new girl does have more tomato flavor. It has sweetness to balance that acid. And to me, it tastes a 1 point bigger than that. So if that's a 2.5, that's going to be a 3.5. And Moskovich, I'd say it's in the same range. It has a little bit less sweetness to it. It's more kind of balanced rather than like heavy on sweetness versus acid. So in terms of texture, I'd say that these are juicy and firm, the early girl and new girl. The Moskovich, I'd say, is juicy and creamy. You could see that creaminess really in there. Even if I press up against it, it kind of like deflects into itself, almost like it's melting, which is actually quite a nice texture. I think this one, it's got okay flavor. I'd say if it's the same as a 3.5, let's go ahead and call both these 3s instead, because it's not better than any of the other tomatoes I rated before that. One thing I'll say about Moskovich is that it is going to be bigger than any of the early tomatoes that I grew before. So that is kind of convenient to have something big enough to slice onto a burger. It does have that rich, creamy mouthfeel to it. Now, if I had to choose one of these, it's going to be New Girl. In fact, I've decided to eliminate Early Girl from my growing repertoire altogether and replace it with New Girl because the flavor is just better. The yield seems to be about the same across the board for both of them, but the better flavor to me is the most important thing. So New Girl is a keeper. Moskovich is one that I would consider growing again, but here in San Diego, the early varieties aren't that necessary, but it is pretty dang good that it's creamy. So if you're looking for a nice, early, reliable tomato, definitely check out Moskovich if you want to mix it up from all the early tomatoes that you've grown before that are mostly on the juicy to watery side. This one has some real texture to it, and that's something I appreciate. Now this tomato here should have a variety name, but I can't find the label. So I've labeled it Mystery Bulgarian because it's in my row of Bulgarian tomatoes back there. I could backtrack and figure it out eventually if I needed to. So let's see if I have a compelling reason. Right off the bat, I could tell that it's going to be a creamy tomato. It actually looks like it might even be mealy, which is not good if it is, but let's see if that's true. Definitely creamy. As creamy as that tomato I described earlier as being the most creamy at the moment. Similar creaminess to Moneymaker, but it has more sweetness to it. It doesn't have that much acid, but the creaminess is really pleasant. So we'll see how this does throughout the season. Obviously, I don't know the name to recommend to you guys right now, but it's interesting. The fact that it is Bulgarian is probably going to be a reason that I would keep it. I like that the gel on the seed cavity here holds together really nicely. But yeah, very classic tomato. Nothing really bad, nothing too special about it. Definitely one to consider, but let's see how it does through the season before I actually keep it. Now let's talk about sauce tomatoes. Now, if you don't know sauce tomato, I've got two here. This is one that I've grown year after year. It's called Granadero. It's one of the most prolific that I grow. It has really nice meaty walls here. So the main thing about sauce tomatoes is that you want more meat to seed ratio. You want more of the flesh than the seed, and this obviously has that. So that's good to see. This one is from Bene Seeds, the one that grew the Talvez tomato, and it's called Tiren. So let's see how that one looks. Wow, this is more like San Marzano style. It actually has empty seed cavity, which is very classic and typical for sauce tomatoes. So what I mean by empty is in here, there's actually airspace instead of just water. And the reason why that's good for a sauce tomato is that you don't want a lot of water. The less amount of water you have, the less time you have to cook that tomato sauce to get it down to the texture you want. So this would be a tomato that does produce sauce very, very quickly. The thing I do like about Granadero, even though it is a little bit juicier, a little wetter, so to say, is that it's a little bit more multi-purpose. I've used Granadero in sandwiches before, quite nice. Tiren would be a little bit harder because it's so skinny and it does have that air cavity space. Now let's taste it. They're almost identical in flavor, honestly. I'd say the Tiren is maybe a little sweeter. It could be a problem, but the fact that it has less water means that it's not going to concentrate that much more sugar anyway. This will cook very quickly. The fact that this is less sweet is good because it is a sauce tomato and it is a little bit wetter. It's gonna cook for some period of time. The longer you cook it, the more concentrated it gets, the more the sugars get concentrated. You don't wanna end up with a sugary tomato sauce. You want something that has some sweetness to it. So overall, I might move forward growing both. I haven't actually had a drier sauce tomato like this in my garden before. I'd love to experiment with using that versus this one to see how quick I can make a tomato sauce. This would probably be really good for making a pizza sauce on the spot to throw right into a pizza. But I do like how prolific this one is. It's very resistant to powdery mildew, which is a huge problem for me and a rare feature in tomatoes. So that's why I grow it every single year. And as you can see, it's also very, very prolific. They're big tomatoes, very easy to work with, and they produce heavy trusses all at once. So in terms of taste, they're sauce tomatoes, so I'm gonna just say that they're threes, but this one has incredible yields. The Tiren is actually yielding quite well as well. It seems to be holding up just as well as the Granadero in terms of yield. So I think moving forward, they're both gonna be keepers for me. I like the multi-purposeness of this, but I also like the fact that this is more akin to something like a San Marzano. And now it's time to talk about cherry tomatoes. Right here on the board, I have two varieties, both are yellow. And the one that I've grown every single year since I started and will grow every single year as long as it exists is the Sungold. So Sungold's on the left here, has this more orange hue to it. One of the problems with Sungold and the reason why you often cannot find it in the grocery store is that they do tend to crack when you pick them, which makes them hard to transport, hard to market. But if you're growing them at home, that's not a problem because they almost never make it into the kitchen anyway. They're so good, warm, fresh off the vine. They have some complexity to them. They're very sweet tomatoes. I can't deny that, but it's not just sweet. There's something else going on. It's almost like it has like a savoriness or like some sort of tropical undertone. And yes, I did say tropical is the flavor, whatever, you guys know what I mean. And it's one that I'm going to be growing in perpetuity as long as the variety exists. I mention that because some people say that the genetics of it have become a little bit less stable. Hopefully that's not true. Hopefully we'll get to keep eating it for years to come. But now let's compare it to a new one, to me, the Sunrise Bumblebee. It is in a similar kind of color range, but it has that kind of streakiness to it, which makes it a much more attractive tomato. And the thing that I appreciate about it is it doesn't tend to crack. I haven't had one really explode on me yet, which means that I could keep it inside. If I get it too many at once, I don't have to immediately cook something. I can actually hold on to them. So let's see what it tastes like. It has some sweetness to it. It has a more of a creamy texture for a cherry tomato that I'm used to, which I actually appreciate quite a bit. I'm very curious to try, I don't know if I've tried a Sungold that I just threw salt straight on. So let's try that first. I'd say that the Sungold itself, it's got a very loose texture. It kind of falls apart in your mouth. Not quite creamy, more juicy. The Sunrise Bumblebee is one of these tomatoes that's designed to have a thicker skin so it could hold well. So you do have that thicker skin bite in your mouth, which some people again don't like. I'd say it's a little creamier than it is just wet and juicy like the Sungold is, but quite good. I think it might be one that I add to my rotation. I like that it holds longer on the vines. It's less stressful to have to pick and use right away. It has enough flavor that keeps me coming back. I've actually now gone in for the third bite here. Not as good as the Sungold. If I gave the Sungold a 4.5, I could probably give this a 3.5. It's just not quite as interesting as the Sungold, but it is good. And the fact that it holds for a long time is appealing to me. So that's gonna be a likely keeper until I could find another one to usurp that one to actually fight off the Sungold in the future. And now we've got one that I get from Botanical Interest every year. It's called Gardener's Delight. I think the name speaks for itself here. Who doesn't love this tomato? It's a very interesting cherry tomato because it tends to have a larger size. Some of them could be a lot bigger. Some of them will be more typical sized. But in the end, it's the flavor that counts. So the thing I find interesting about Gardener's Delight is that it has that classic cherry tomato taste sort of blended with a classic slicing tomato flavor. I like the fact that it's a little bit bigger because I could quarter it and throw it into a salad, and these are really nice, wonderful bite-sized chunks without being a whole lot of work to cut up a bunch of tiny cherry tomatoes. So that's a nice plus for me. It's one that I've grown now for 3 years in a row, and I do plan on continuing to grow that one. It could be better, just like anything that scored a 4, but I just don't know what else to say. It's just a very reliable tomato that I really, really enjoy. Now this one here is the first cherry tomato that I grew in my garden. It's actually one that I got as a plant from Home Depot when I first started this garden, and that is the Husky Cherry. Now this has been a tomato that's been in our hearts since we started, but also for the fact that I had a plant growing in my garden for 18 months. Went from spring through the summer, through the fall, through the winter, through the next spring, and then finally the next summer after that, I decided to get rid of it because it got so spindly and hard to trellis that it was just a little bit of a joke to keep it in the garden any longer. I decided to put it out of its misery. Now the thing about this tomato, it's a hybrid, but it's very hybrid. And when I say it's very hybrid, I mean that this thing could be absolutely covered in disease with the leaves rotting off of it, and the new growth will continue to release new tomatoes looking entirely fine. The taste is still fine. No matter how much disease this thing gets, it just keeps on cranking. It has a very classic cherry tomato flavor, very sweet, like an explosive sweetness. I like how they hold for a long time too. It's a compact plant. It's semi-dwarfing, so it doesn't actually get that big, which is the reason I was able to keep it growing for 18 months without it just sort of taking over the whole garden. So this is one, again, it has a soft spot in my heart. The flavor is quite good. I'd say it's probably like a 3.5 to a 4. It's just very classic cherry tomato, but the disease resistance, the compactness of it, and then how prolific it is, all that makes up for any other problems it might have. And it's another one of these that I'm going to just have in my garden. As long as I can find it and get it, I will be growing it because it's so dang reliable. Now this last one here is another new one to me. It's, I guess, a grape tomato. I believe it's called the Artisan Tiger. If it's not, I'll put the correct name on the screen. But it's one of these interesting sort of streaky tomatoes. I picked one that's a little bit greener. Okay, that one's definitely underripe. Let's actually give it a taste. That's interesting. It still had sweetness, even while it's green, but look how much more red it got. So hopefully this one isn't overripe. All right, I would categorize this one similar to Lemon Boy. You pick it early, you get more tartness, there's still sweetness. You let it sit a little longer, most of the tartness is gone, it's mostly sweet, but it's not like funky sweet. It's actually still quite good. Now this is one that's been in my greenhouse, similar length of time as the Beefy Purple, a little bit less. And it's done quite well. I think I picked it up at a Tomato Mania sale, and it's still producing in the greenhouse even though it's really hot in there. It's a wonderful salad tomato. That's what I would use it most for. At this point, the texture is kind of harder to describe when it gets down to these. It's, I'd say, more like firm to juicy in terms of texture, but that's actually quite good. I normally am not that crazy about these kind of streaky grape tomatoes. In the past, I feel like I've never really enjoyed them, but that might be a keeper there. That is quite good. Now, across the board here, we tasted a lot of tomatoes, and I seem to like almost every single one. Now, we did eliminate some. I'd say Moneymaker is on borderline just because the flavor is a little weak. Strawberry Fields I decided to get rid of. Glacier I got rid of. Early Girl I got rid of. Moskovich I don't need. And then in terms of the bigger boys, Benevento I wouldn't grow again. The yield is too low, too spotty for me to bother. Let's see if I can eliminate anyone else. Beefy Purple, no, that's a keeper. That was actually quite good. Honestly, guys, I think if anything, I just made my problem worse. I now want to grow the Woodstock tomato again year after year. I picked up a new plum tomato. I got a new cherry tomato with the sunrise bumblebee. So we'll see. When it comes to making my tomato list next year, it's gonna actually be a very, very difficult challenge to choose which ones I want to grow, which ones are worth keeping, which ones I should get rid of. And I don't know how I'm gonna do it. But we will figure it out next year because I don't want to grow 25 varieties again. It's too annoying to have this many different ones spread out to keep track of. So we're gonna try to narrow down the list next year to 20 max. And I'm including across the board, including cherry tomatoes, determinate tomatoes, which we didn't even taste here. And if we could get down to 20, a solid 20 list, I would be very happy to keep and share and work off of that. So in the future, I'm only gonna add maybe 2 to 3 tomatoes next year to trial and slim down this list a bit. But that was kind of interesting. In the end, I'm not full yet. I'm actually looking forward to having a big old tomato salad because we've got quite a bit of tomatoes that we already cut into for this taste test. But it was kind of fun. I don't know. Let me know if this was interesting to you guys. It's honestly a lot harder than I thought to give good descriptions on what these things taste like. But I'm pretty pleased with this year's tomato yields. The yields have been good, the flavors have been great, and the textures have been really fun to eat. I am still looking for more creamy tomatoes that have really, really delicious taste. The moneymaker kind of had the creaminess I was looking for, but not the taste that I want. So the hunt continues. We'll see what I add next year, but thank you guys for watching. Let me know if you guys found this interesting or what you would want me to change, what I should add. It honestly got a little bit hard to keep track of all the things I wanted to say every single time, but I'll still share the list as it is, and hopefully you guys will get some value out of that. But I'll see you guys next time. I've got myself a tomato salad to make.